The bullet whistled past Brenna Kincaid's ear, so close she felt the heat of it. And in that instant, she realized her brother's warning had come too late. The ambush was already upon them, and she would either die here in this narrow canyon or somehow find the strength to become someone she had never been before. She threw herself from her paint mare, hitting the rocky ground hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. Around her, the Apache warriors who had been escorting her back to the reservation scattered like quail, seeking cover among the boulders. Gunfire cracked and echoed off the canyon walls, creating a deafening chorus that made it impossible to tell how many attackers there were or where they were positioned. Brenna crawled behind a large rock, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had lived with the Kairikahua Apache for 8 years, ever since she was 14 and her missionary parents had been killed by cholera. The tribe had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, and she had learned their ways, their language, their customs. She wore her dark hair in the Apache style, dressed in buckskin and beadwork, and could track game as well as any hunter. But her pale skin and green eyes marked her as different. As someone caught between two worlds, she could never fully belong to either one. The shooting intensified. She heard Running Deer cry out, saw him clutch his shoulder and fall. Her chest tightened with fear for the young warrior who had been her friend and protector. They had been traveling to Fort Bowie to collect the meager rations the government promised, but rarely delivered on time. It was supposed to be a routine trip, but someone had decided to make it something else entirely. "Hold your fire," a voice rang out from above, strong and commanding. "There is a woman down there." The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. The silence that followed was almost worse than the gunfire, heavy with tension and the ringing aftermath of violence. Brenna pressed herself against the boulder, trying to make herself as small as possible. She could hear the Apache warriors breathing hard, preparing for what would come next. "Show yourselves," the same voice called. "We are Texas Rangers tracking stolen cattle. If you are peaceful, no more shots will be fired." Brenna's mind raced. Texas Rangers this far into Arizona territory? That made no sense. But she had heard the authority in that voice, the kind of command that came from someone who expected to be obeyed. She glanced at Running Deer, who was trying to stop the bleeding from his shoulder wound. The other warriors looked to her, their expressions asking what she thought they should do. She had always been the bridge between the Apache world and the white world. Even when she did not want that responsibility, it fell to her. "We are peaceful," she called back in English, her voice steadier than she felt. "We are traveling to Fort Bowie for rations." "You have wounded one of our party." There was a long pause, then the sound of boots on rock, careful and measured. Brenna stayed behind her boulder, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. It was not much of a weapon against rifles, but it was something. A man appeared at the canyon rim, silhouetted against the bright Arizona sky. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty brown hat and a vest over a chambray shirt. Even from this distance, Brenna could see the badge pinned to his chest gleaming in the sunlight. He held his rifle pointed down, not threatening but ready. "My name is Yates Quinn," he called down, "Ranger out of Texas. We have been tracking rustlers who hit a ranch near the border 3 days ago. Tracks led us here." "We know nothing about stolen cattle," Brenna replied. "We are trying to get to the fort before the ration office closes for the day." Yates Quinn studied the scene below him. Brenna could feel his gaze move over her, taking in her Apache clothing and the warriors around her. She lifted her chin, refusing to be ashamed of how she looked or who she had become. "You speak English well," he observed. "I was born speaking it," she said shortly. "Are you going to let us pass, or are you going to shoot at us again?" She heard him exhale, saw him lower his rifle completely. "Come on up here. Let me see who I am dealing with properly." It was not a request. Brenna looked at Running Deer again. He nodded slightly, though his face was tight with pain. She took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the boulder, her hands visible and empty. She began climbing up the rocky slope toward where the ranger stood. As she got closer, she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was all hard angles and strong features, handsome in a rugged way that made her pulse skip despite her wariness. He watched her approach with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as though he could see right through the buckskin and beadwork to the confusion that lived inside her. When she reached the top of the slope, they stood facing each other for a long moment. He was even taller up close, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. She saw surprise flicker across his face as he took in her features, the way her green eyes contrasted with her Apache dress and bearing. "You are white," he said, and there was something in his voice she could not quite identify. Not accusation, but perhaps bewilderment. "My parents were missionaries," Brenna said, keeping her voice level. "They died of cholera 8 years ago. The Apache took me in. And you stayed." "I had nowhere else to go. I was 14 years old with no family, no money, no way to survive on my own." She crossed her arms. "The Kairakathua gave me a home when no one else would." Yates Quinn studied her face as though trying to read something written there. "What is your name?" "Brenna Kincaid." He nodded slowly, as though committing it to memory. Behind him, she could see 3 other men, all wearing ranger badges, all watching this exchange with varying degrees of interest and suspicion. One of them, a wiry man with a sharp face, spat tobacco juice and shook his head. "Boss, we are wasting time," the wiry man said. "Them Indians probably already ran off the cattle we have been tracking." "These people do not have cattle with them, Dockery," Yates said without turning around. "Use your eyes. Could have hid them somewhere. Indians are tricky." Brenna felt her temper flare. "We have not seen your cattle. We left the reservation 2 days ago and have been traveling steadily toward Fort Bowie. If you were any kind of tracker, you could see that our trail does not match what you have been following." Dockery's face reddened. "You got a smart mouth for a squaw." "And you have a stupid one for a ranger," Brenna shot back. For a moment, she thought Dockery might actually attack her. His hand moved toward his gun, his face twisting with anger. But Yates Quinn stepped smoothly between them, his body language casual but his position deliberate. "That is enough," he said quietly. The words were soft, but they carried weight. Dockery subsided, though he continued to glare at Brenna with undisguised hostility. Yates turned back to her. "Show me your trail. If it does not match the rustler's tracks, you can go on your way." It was more than she had expected, certainly more than Dockery would have offered. Brenna nodded curtly and led him down the slope to where the Apache warriors waited. Running Deer had managed to bind his shoulder, but blood was seeping through the cloth. She went to him immediately, checking the wound with practiced hands. "How bad?" she asked in Apache. "The bullet went through," he replied in the same language. "I will live, but I need proper tending." She nodded and turned to Yates Quinn, who had followed her down. "Your men shot my friend. He needs medical attention." Yates crouched beside Running Deer, his movements careful and unthreatening. He examined the wound with the eye of someone who had seen plenty of bullet holes. "Clean exit wound. You were lucky. A few inches lower and it would have hit lung." Running Deer said nothing, just stared at the ranger with dark, unreadable eyes. Brenna knew what he was thinking. It was rangers and soldiers and settlers who had driven the Apache onto reservations, who had killed their leaders and scattered their people. Luck had nothing to do with being shot at while trying to collect government rations. I have bandages and whiskey in my pack, Yates said, standing. Let me get them. He climbed back up the slope. Brenna watched him go, confused by his consideration. In her experience, most white men saw the Apache as less than human, obstacles to be removed or problems to be solved. This ranger had shot first and asked questions later, true, but now he seemed genuinely concerned about Running Deer's welfare. Do not trust him, Running Deer murmured in Apache. He wears a badge. Badge men bring only trouble. I know, Brenna replied. But even as she said it, she felt uncertain. There was something about Yates Quinn that did not fit her expectations. Something that made her want to look at him longer, to understand what kind of man lived behind those storm-gray eyes. Yates returned with his supplies and helped Brenna clean and properly bandage Running Deer's wound. His hands were surprisingly gentle for someone so rough-looking, his touch sure and competent. When he poured whiskey over the injury, Running Deer did not flinch, though Brenna knew it must have burned terribly. There, Yates said when they were done. That should hold until you can get proper doctoring at the fort. Thank you, Brenna said and meant it. He looked at her, and for a moment something passed between them, some flicker of recognition or connection she did not understand. Then he stood and brushed off his hands. Now show me these tracks you mentioned. Brenna led him away from the group, pointing out the trail they had been following. The tracks were clear to anyone with basic skills. 5 horses, traveling steadily northeast, no cattle. Yates studied them carefully, then pulled out a small notebook and compared what he was seeing to notes he had written. After several minutes, he straightened and nodded. You are right. These tracks do not match what we have been following. He met her eyes. I apologize for the ambush. We have been tracking these rustlers for days, and when we saw your group in the canyon, we assumed the worst. It was more of an apology than she had expected. Brenna felt some of her anger drain away, replaced by cautious curiosity. Where are these rustlers now? Their trails split off about a mile back. Looks like they went west toward the hills. He paused, studying her face again with that intense focus. You have lived in this territory for 8 years. Do you know of any places out west where someone might hide stolen cattle? Brenna considered. There were dozens of hidden valleys and box canyons in the mountains, places the Apache knew well, but she was not about to share that knowledge with a Texas Ranger. I might. Why would I tell you? Because those cattle belong to a family ranch, Yates said. The Johnsons. They are decent people who work hard and treat their hands fairly. This theft could ruin them. He held her gaze. And because despite what you might think, not all badge men are your enemy. She wanted to argue with that. Wanted to tell him about all the times badge men had broken promises, stolen land, killed innocent people. But something in his expression stopped her. He looked tired, she realized. Tired and sincere and maybe a little sad. There is a valley about 10 miles west, she said slowly. Hidden entrance, good grass and water. If someone wanted to hide cattle, that would be a good place. Will you show me? The question caught her off guard. What? Will you guide us there? Yates gestured back toward the canyon where his men waited. Clearly, I need better tracking help than I have been getting, and you know this land better than any of us. I need to get to the fort, Brenna said. The rations, I will make sure you get there, he interrupted. After we find those cattle, I will escort you to Fort Bowie myself and make sure the ration office stays open for you. You have my word. She should say no. Should tell him to figure it out himself and continue on to the fort with Running Deer and the others. But she found herself hesitating, found herself wanting to say yes for reasons that had nothing to do with rations or stolen cattle. There was something about this ranger that drew her, something that made her want to spend more time in his presence, even though every logical part of her brain said it was a terrible idea. "I cannot speak for the others," she said finally. "This is their decision, too." She walked back to the group and explained the situation in Apache. Running Deer frowned, clearly unhappy with the idea. The other warriors were openly skeptical. But after a long discussion, they agreed that Brenna could go with the Rangers while they continued on to the fort at a slower pace to accommodate Running Deer's injury. "Be careful," Running Deer told her. "These men are dangerous." "All men are dangerous," Brenna replied. "I will watch myself." She gathered her few belongings and climbed back up to where Yates waited. He had his horse ready, a big roan gelding with intelligent eyes. He swung into the saddle and offered her his hand. She ignored it and mounted behind him on her own, settling herself on the horse's rump. She was close enough to feel the warmth of his body, to smell leather and sage and something uniquely him. Her heart beat faster, and she told herself it was just from the exertion of climbing. They rode west, Yates and his 3 men following the trail she indicated. Dockery continued to shoot suspicious glances her way, but the other 2 rangers seemed neutral enough. One was an older man named Peters who had kind eyes and a weathered face. The other was young, probably no more than 20, and introduced himself as Cole Winters. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed into the hills. Brenna directed them along game trails that were barely visible, paths she had learned from years of traveling with Apache hunters. She could feel Yates's attention on her every move, but he said nothing, trusting her guidance without question. That trust surprised her more than she wanted to admit. They reached the valley entrance just before sunset. It was exactly as she remembered, a narrow gap between 2 rock faces that looked like a dead end until you got right up to it. Through that gap lay a hidden valley perhaps 2 miles across, surrounded by steep walls and filled with good grazing land. "Wait here," Yates said quietly. He dismounted and moved forward on foot, gesturing for his men to spread out. They advanced carefully, weapons ready but not drawn. Brenna watched from horseback, her nerves tight with anticipation. Yates disappeared through the gap. Minutes passed. Then she heard him call out, "Found them." The Rangers moved in quickly. Brenna followed, guiding the roan through the narrow entrance and into the valley beyond. There, grazing peacefully in the fading light, was a herd of about 50 cattle. And sitting around a small campfire, looking shocked and angry at being discovered, were 4 rough-looking men. What happened next went fast. The rustlers reached for their guns. The Rangers were faster. Shots rang out, echoing off the valley walls. Brenna's horse danced nervously beneath her, but she kept her seat, her heart pounding. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the rustlers were down and the other 2 had their hands in the air. Yates and his men moved in to secure the prisoners and check the wounded. One of the downed rustlers was dead, shot through the heart. The other was gut-shot and dying, his breathing shallow and labored. Brenna had seen enough death to recognize when it was coming. She slid down from the horse and walked over to where Yates was binding the hands of one of the surrendered men. "Is it over?" "It is over," he confirmed. He looked up at her, and there was satisfaction in his eyes. "Thanks to you, we never would have found this place without your help. The Johnsons will get their cattle back, every last one of them." He finished with the rope and stood. "You did a good thing today, Brenna Kincaid." Hearing her name in his voice did something to her insides, made them feel warm and unsteady. She looked away, suddenly uncertain. "I just showed you a valley. You showed me more than that." He stepped closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body in the cooling evening air. "You trusted me enough to help, even though you had no reason to. That means something." She met his eyes and saw sincerity there, but also something else. Something that made her breath catch and her pulse quicken. There was attraction in his gaze, clear and undeniable, And God help her, she felt it too. This ranger with his storm-gray eyes and gentle hands, this man who had shot at her and then bandaged her friend's wound, who spoke to her like an equal and trusted her guidance without question. "We should make camp," she said, her voice coming out softer than she intended. "It is too dark to move the cattle now. You are right." But he did not step back, did not break eye contact. They stood there in the gathering dusk, the air between them charged with possibility. Peters cleared his throat loudly. "Boss, where do you want us to set up?" The spell broke. Yates turned away, giving orders about watch rotations and securing the prisoners. Brenna went to tend the horses, grateful for something to do with her hands. But she could feel his attention on her throughout the evening, could sense his awareness of her every movement. They ate a simple meal of beans and hardtack around the fire. Dockery continued to eye Brenna with distrust, but the others treated her with casual acceptance now that she had proven herself useful. Cole asked her questions about living with the Apache, his curiosity genuine and unmalicious. Peters mostly stayed quiet, but he smiled at her kindly when he handed her coffee. Yates sat across the fire from her, his face half in shadow. Every time she looked up, she found him watching her. Their eyes would meet and hold for a heartbeat too long, until one of them looked away. It was a dance of sorts, tentative and charged with meaning neither of them had spoken aloud. When it came time to sleep, Yates insisted she take his bedroll. "You should be comfortable. You earned it today." "Where will you sleep?" "I will take first watch. By the time I am done, you will be up and I can use it then." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her. It had been a long, violent, emotionally complicated day. She accepted the bedroll with murmured thanks and found a spot near the fire. The blankets smelled like him, that same combination of leather and sage and something indefinable. She wrapped herself in them and closed her eyes, acutely aware that he was sitting nearby, watching over the camp and over her. Sleep took her slowly. Her last waking thought was of storm-gray eyes and the way her name sounded in his voice. She woke before dawn to find Yates still awake, sitting on a rock with his rifle across his knees. Peters and Cole were asleep, snoring softly. Dockery was supposed to be on watch on the other side of the camp, but Brenna suspected from the rhythmic sounds coming from that direction that he had fallen asleep at his post. She sat up, pushing hair out of her face. Yates looked over at her and smiled slightly. "Morning. You did not wake me for the bedroll. You needed the sleep more than I needed the comfort." He stretched, his spine cracking audibly. "Besides, I have been thinking." "About what?" He was quiet for a moment, as though choosing his words carefully. "About you. About how you ended up caught between two worlds." Brenna felt her defenses rise. "It is not your concern. Maybe not, but I find myself concerned anyway." He set the rifle aside and stood, walking over to where she sat. "Can I ask you something?" She shrugged, trying to appear more casual than she felt. "You ever think about going back? To the white world, I mean." The question hit harder than she expected. "There is nothing for me in the white world. I have no family, no money, no prospects. I would be alone." "You are not alone now." "That is different. The Apache accept me as one of their own. I belong there. Do you?" His voice was gentle but probing. "Or do you just tell yourself that because it is easier than admitting you do not fully belong anywhere?" Anger flared in her chest. "You do not know anything about me or my life." "You are right, I do not." He crouched down so they were at eye level. "But I see the way you look sometimes, like you are standing on the outside looking in. I recognize it because I look the same way." That stopped her cold. "What do you mean?" "I grew up in West Texas, son of a rancher who expected me to follow in his footsteps. But I did not want that life. I wanted something different, something that was mine." He smiled sadly. So I became a ranger, and my father never forgave me for it. I have been caught between two worlds myself, Brenna. The world I came from and the world I chose. Neither one feels completely right. She stared at him, seeing him differently now. Not just as a ranger or a representative of the white world that had caused her people so much pain, but as a person. A man who understood something about not quite fitting anywhere. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "Because I think maybe you and I are not so different, and because I want you to know that being caught between worlds does not mean you have to stay that way forever. You can build something new, something that is entirely yours." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Build something new. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Before she could respond, Dockery woke with a loud snort and began complaining about the cold. The moment broke, but the words stayed with her, circling in her mind like birds. They broke camp at first light and began driving the cattle back east. It was slow work, and Brenna helped by riding point and keeping the herd moving in the right direction. She was a good rider, better than any of the rangers except possibly Yates himself, and she could tell they were impressed by her skill even if they did not say so aloud. They made camp again that night, still half a day's ride from the Johnson ranch. After dinner, Yates asked Brenna to walk with him to check the perimeter. She knew it was an excuse to get her alone, and she went anyway, her heart beating fast. They walked in silence for a while, moving through the darkness guided by starlight. Finally, Yates spoke. "Tomorrow we will reach the Johnsons' place. After that I will take you to Fort Bowie like I promised." "I remember." "And then what?" "You go back to the reservation and I ride back to Texas and we never see each other again." She stopped walking. "What else would happen?" He turned to face her, and in the starlight his eyes were dark and intense. "I do not want that to be how this ends. Yates, let me finish." He stepped closer. "I know this is crazy. I know we barely know each other and we come from completely different worlds, but I cannot stop thinking about you. From the moment I saw you in that canyon, something in me just knew you were different, knew you were important." Her breath caught. "You do not know me. Then let me know you. Stay with me, at least for a while longer. Come with me to the Johnson ranch, see the cattle safely returned. Then we can talk about what comes next. I have responsibilities. The people at the reservation will still be there in a few more days." His voice was urgent now, almost pleading. "Brenna, I am not asking you to abandon your life. I am just asking you for a little more time, a chance to see if this connection between us is real or just something I am imagining." She should say no. Should tell him this was impossible, that they had no future together. But when she opened her mouth, different words came out. "You are not imagining it." Relief flooded his face. "Then stay, please." She thought about Running Deer's warning about how badge men brought only trouble. She thought about the reservation, about the life she had built there over 8 years. But she also thought about what Yates had said that morning, about being caught between worlds, about building something new. "A few more days," she said finally. "That is all I am promising." His smile was like sunrise, bright and transforming. "That is enough." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and calloused against hers. It was a simple touch, chaste even, but it sent electricity racing up her arm. They stood there holding hands in the darkness, neither of them speaking, both of them breathing too fast. "We should get back," Brenna said eventually, though she made no move to pull away. "We should," Yates agreed, but he did not let go of her hand. They walked back to camp still connected, and when they finally separated, Brenna felt the loss of his touch like a physical ache. She lay down in her bedroll and watched him take his watch position, and she knew with absolute certainty that something had changed between them. Something that could not be unchanged. They reached the Johnson ranch the next afternoon, driving the cattle through the main gate to the delighted shouts of the family. The Johnsons were exactly as Yates had described: decent, hard-working people who were nearly in tears at getting their herd back. Mrs. Johnson hugged each of the Rangers in turn, her face wet with gratitude. When she got to Brenna, she hesitated only a moment before embracing her as well. "Thank you," Mrs. Johnson whispered. "Thank you for helping bring them home." The simple kindness of it made Brenna's throat tight. She had expected suspicion or hostility, the usual reactions white settlers had to her Apache clothing and bearing. Instead, she was met with genuine appreciation. Mr. Johnson insisted they all stay for dinner, and they ended up at a long table in the ranch house, eating beef stew and fresh bread while the Johnson children peppered them with questions about the rescue. Brenna found herself relaxing in the warm atmosphere, laughing at Cole's exaggerated retelling of the capture and adding her own details when Yates encouraged her. After dinner, Yates and Mr. Johnson went outside to discuss Ranger business. Brenna helped Mrs. Johnson with the dishes, and the older woman asked her gently about her life. Brenna found herself opening up more than she expected, talking about her parents and the cholera outbreak and the years since. "You have had a difficult road," Mrs. Johnson said kindly. "But you seem to be a strong young woman. I am sure you will find your way." "I am not sure what my way is supposed to be," Mrs. Johnson smiled. "None of us are, dear. We just have to trust that the path will become clear as we walk it." That evening, Brenna and Yates sat on the porch steps watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. The other Rangers were inside playing cards with the Johnson boys. For the first time since they had met, they were truly alone with no pretense of guard duty or checking perimeter. "Thank you for staying," Yates said quietly, "for giving this a chance." "I have not decided anything yet," Brenna reminded him, but her voice was soft. "I know, but you are here. That is something." He turned to look at her. "Can I ask you another question? You seem to have a lot of questions." "Just one more, at least for tonight." He took a breath. "When you think about your future, what do you see? What do you want?" No one had ever asked her that before. The question opened something inside her, some locked door she had kept carefully closed. "I do not know. I suppose I always thought I would just continue as I have been, living with the tribe, helping where I can, existing in the space between worlds. That is not a future. That is just surviving. Maybe surviving is enough. Is it?" He shifted to face her fully. "Brenna, you are 22 years old. You are smart and capable and brave. You deserve more than just surviving. You deserve a life that is yours, a future you choose." "What kind of future could I possibly choose? I have no money, no education beyond what my parents taught me, no prospects. The world does not have much use for women like me." "Then maybe we build a world that does." He said it simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Build a new world with me, Brenna. One where you do not have to be caught between anything, where you can just be yourself." Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "You do not know what you are saying. You have known me for 3 days. I know enough." He reached out and took her hand again, just as he had the night before. "I know you are the bravest person I have ever met. I know you speak 3 languages and can track like a ghost and sit a horse better than men who have been riding since they could walk. I know you have a good heart and a sharp mind and eyes that haunt my dreams." He squeezed her fingers. "Tell me that is not enough to build on." She wanted to protest, to list all the reasons this was impossible, but the words would not come. Because he was looking at her like she was something precious, and no one had looked at her that way since her parents died. Because he was offering her something she had never dared to want, a future that was not predetermined, a life she could choose for herself. "What would that even look like?" she whispered. This new world you are talking about. I do not know exactly. We would have to figure it out together. His thumb stroked across her knuckles, sending shivers up her arm. But I think it starts with us being honest. I am falling in love with you, Brenna Kincaid. I know it is too soon and too crazy and probably too stupid, but it is the truth. I am falling in love with you and I want to see where that takes us. The declaration hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Brenna could barely breathe. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the possibility of this not working out. But a larger part wanted to lean into it, to trust this feeling that had been growing in her chest since the moment he stepped between her and Dockery's anger. I do not know if I can do this, she said, her voice shaking. I do not know if I am brave enough. You are the bravest person I know, he repeated, but you do not have to decide everything right now. Just tell me you feel something too. Tell me I am not alone in this. She looked at him, really looked at him. At his storm-gray eyes and his weathered face, and the way he was holding her hand like it was the most important thing in the world. And she realized she did not want to lie, did not want to protect herself at the cost of this chance. You are not alone, she said. I feel it too. The smile that broke across his face was joy made visible. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting. Then that is enough. We will figure out the rest as we go. They sat on the porch steps until full dark fell, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on a ranch, about his complicated relationship with his father, about why he became a ranger. She told him about her parents' mission work, about the early days with the Apache when she barely knew how to survive, about the family she had found among people who were not her own. When they finally went inside, it felt like something had shifted permanently. They had crossed some invisible line from strangers to something more, something that had potential and promise written all over it. The next morning, Yates told his men they were splitting up. Dockery, Peters, and Cole would escort the prisoners back to Texas to face trial. Yates would take Brenna to Fort Bowie as promised, then head back to rejoin them later. Dockery did not like that arrangement one bit. You are letting some Indian squaw mess with your head, boss. This is a mistake. What I do is my business, not yours, Yates said coolly. You have your orders. Follow them. Dockery spat in the dirt and walked away muttering. Peters just shrugged, unconcerned, but Cole pulled Brenna aside before they left. I do not know what is happening between you and the boss, he said quietly. But I have known him for 2 years, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Be good to him. He deserves someone good. The words touched her more than she expected. I will try. That is all any of us can do. She watched the 3 Rangers ride off with their prisoners, then turned to find Yates saddling his roan. He looked up and smiled at her, and her heart did that fluttering thing again. Ready, as I will ever be. They said goodbye to the Johnsons, accepting packages of food for the journey with grateful thanks. Then they headed northeast toward Fort Bowie, just the 2 of them riding across the vast Arizona landscape. It should have been awkward, this sudden intimacy after the buffer of the other Rangers. But instead it felt natural, easy. They talked as they rode, sharing stories and observations. Yates pointed out tracks and asked her to identify them, clearly testing her skills and being impressed by what he found. She showed him plants the Apache used for medicine and food, and he listened with genuine interest. They stopped for lunch beside a creek, letting the horses drink and rest. Brenna sat on a sun-warmed rock, watching the water flow over smooth stones. Yates sat beside her close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I have been thinking, he said. That seems to be a habit of yours, he smiled. When we get to Fort Bowie, you should come with me back to Texas. She turned to stare at him. What? Just hear me out. He shifted to face her. I know you have ties to the reservation, people you care about, but what kind of life is that really? Living on a reservation, dependent on government rations that are always late and never enough. You deserve better. And Texas is better, it could be, for us. He took her hand. I have saved money from my ranger pay. Enough to buy a small piece of land, start a ranch of my own. It would not be fancy, but it would be ours. We could build something together, something that does not belong to the Apache world or the white world, but to us. The picture he painted was seductive. A place of their own, a life they created together. But fear rose up in her, cold and insistent. Yates, we barely know each other. You are talking about marriage, about building a life together. That is crazy, I know. He smiled ruefully. But sometimes the best things are crazy. Sometimes you have to take a leap and trust you will land somewhere good. And if we do not, if this does not work out, then at least we tried. At least we took the chance instead of wondering what if for the rest of our lives. His gray eyes were intense on hers. I am not asking you to decide right now, but think about it. Really think about what kind of life you want and whether maybe, just maybe, you want to take this leap with me. She did not know what to say. The offer was everything she had secretly longed for and everything she was terrified of in equal measure. So she just nodded, and they finished their lunch in contemplative silence. They reached Fort Bowie late the next afternoon. The fort was a sprawling complex of adobe buildings surrounded by high walls, bustling with soldiers and civilians. Brenna had been here many times before, but never with a white man by her side. She was acutely aware of the stares they drew, the way people looked at her Apache clothing and then at Yates's Ranger badge and tried to make sense of it. Yates ignored the attention completely. He went straight to the ration office and spoke with the officer in charge, his tone brooking no argument. Within an hour, he had arranged not just for the delayed rations to be distributed to the Apache, but for additional supplies to make up for the hardship the delay had caused. Brenna watched him work with a mixture of awe and tenderness. He was using his authority to help her people, to make their lives even a little bit better. It was a small thing in the grand scheme of government injustice and broken treaties, but it meant something. It meant he saw the Apache as people deserving of respect and fair treatment. When the arrangements were complete, Yates turned to her. Your people should receive their supplies tomorrow. I made sure of it. Thank you, she said, meaning it with her whole heart. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did. It was the right thing to do, he hesitated. Will you come back with me to the reservation? I want to meet your family, the people who have been taking care of you. The request surprised her, but it also felt right. If they were going to move forward in any way, he needed to see and understand that part of her life. All right, but I should warn you, they may not welcome you warmly. Rangers and soldiers are not popular on the reservation. I will take my chances. They rode out the next morning, arriving at the reservation by midday. The Kairikahua Reservation was a harsh place, all dust and scrub and crowded wickiups. The people who lived there had haunted eyes and thin bodies, the legacy of forced relocation and inadequate resources. Brenna felt the familiar ache in her chest at seeing it, the helpless anger at the injustice of it all. Children spotted them first and ran to meet them, calling out her Apache name. She smiled and greeted them, slipping off the horse to hug the smaller ones. More people emerged from the wickiups, and soon she was surrounded by friends and family, all asking questions and expressing relief that she was safe. Running Deer appeared, his arm in a sling but looking much better. He eyed Yates warily. You brought the ranger here. I did. He helped ensure the rations will be delivered properly, and he wants to meet you, all of you. Running Deer's expression was skeptical, but he nodded. Slowly, carefully, Brenna made introductions. She brought Yates to meet the elders, the people who had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go. She introduced him to the women who had taught her to tan hides and make baskets, to the men who had taught her to track and ride. To his credit, Yates treated everyone with respect. He did not talk down to them or act superior. He listened when they spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and accepted their suspicion without becoming defensive. Brenna could see some of the hostility slowly ease, replaced by cautious curiosity. That evening, they were invited to share a meal with the family Brenna had lived with for the past 8 years. The matriarch was a woman named Nate, gray-haired and wise, who had been like a grandmother to Brenna. She studied Yates throughout the meal, her dark eyes missing nothing. After they ate, Nate gestured for Brenna to walk with her. They moved away from the fire, out into the darkness where they could speak privately. "This ranger," Nate said in Apache, "you have feelings for him." It was not a question. Brenna nodded, not bothering to deny it. "I do. He has feelings for you as well. I see it in how he looks at you, how he positions himself to protect you even when there is no danger." Nate paused. "What will you do?" "I do not know. He wants me to go with him to Texas to build a life together. But I do not know if I can leave all of this." "Child," Nate said gently, "this is not a life. This is survival. We exist here, but we do not truly live. If this ranger offers you a chance at something more, you should take it. But you are my family. How can I just leave?" "Because we love you, and because love means wanting what is best for those we care about, even when it means letting them go." Nate cupped Brenna's face in her weathered hands. "You have never fully belonged here, not in your heart. You tried to make yourself fit, and we love you for trying. But you are meant for something different, something more." Tears pricked Brenna's eyes. "I am afraid." "Of course you are. Only fools feel no fear when facing the unknown. But you are not a fool, and you are not alone. That ranger, he will walk beside you. I see his strength, his honor. He will not fail you." "How can you know that?" "Because I see the way he looks at you, as though you hung the moon and stars. A man who looks at a woman like that will move mountains for her." Nate smiled. "Go with him, child. Build your new world. We will still be here, and you can visit when you are able. But do not let fear steal your chance at happiness." They walked back to the fire, Brenna's mind churning. Yates looked up when they approached, his expression questioning. She gave him a small smile and sat down beside him, closer than necessary. His hand found hers under cover of darkness and squeezed gently. They stayed on the reservation for 2 more days. Yates helped with repairs to some of the wickiups, his carpentry skills earning grudging approval from the men. Brenna spent time with the women and children, soaking up the familiar rhythms of reservation life. But she also found herself looking at it differently, seeing it through Yates's eyes. Seeing the hardship, the lack of opportunity, the slow grinding down of a proud people. On the 3rd morning, she made her decision. She found Yates tending to his horse, and she stood there for a moment just watching him work. He must have sensed her presence because he looked up and smiled. "Good morning." "Good morning." She took a breath. "I want to talk to you about Texas." His hands stilled on the saddle he was cleaning. "All right. If I come with you, what would that mean, exactly?" He set the saddle aside and gave her his full attention. "It would mean we leave here together and head to Texas. I would take you to meet my family, such as they are. Then we would buy land and start building a ranch. And somewhere in there, if you were willing, I would marry you." Her heart hammered. "You want to marry me?" "More than I have ever wanted anything." He stepped closer. "I know it is fast. I know we should probably court properly, take more time. But I am 30 years old, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I do not want to waste time pretending I am not sure when I am absolutely certain. Certain of what? That you are it for me. That I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building something good and real and ours. He took both her hands in his. So yes, I want to marry you. But only if that is what you want too. She thought about everything Nate had said. About how this was not a life but just survival. About how Yates looked at her like she hung the moon and stars. About building a new world that was not caught between anything but was simply theirs. I want it, she whispered. I am terrified, but I want it. The joy on his face was incandescent. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, his face buried in her hair. Thank you. Thank you for trusting me. I promise I will spend every day earning that trust. She wrapped her arms around him and held on, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. This was real. This was happening. She was choosing a new future, taking a leap into the unknown with this man who had crashed into her life and turned everything upside down. They left the reservation the next morning, saying their goodbyes to people who had become family. Nate hugged Brenna tight and whispered blessings in Apache. Running Deer clasped her shoulder and told her to be happy. The children cried and made her promise to visit. And then they were riding away, heading south and east toward Texas, toward a future that was uncertain and terrifying and full of promise. Brenna looked back once, seeing the reservation shrink in the distance. Then she turned forward, toward Yates and toward whatever came next. The journey to Texas took 2 weeks. They traveled through Arizona territory into New Mexico territory and finally across the border into Texas. The landscape changed as they went, the desert giving way to grasslands and rolling hills. Yates pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the places they passed, and Brenna soaked it all in, this new world she was entering. They were careful to maintain propriety during the journey, sleeping separately and avoiding any situation that might compromise Brenna's reputation. But the tension between them grew with each passing day, the attraction that had been there from the start deepening into something richer and more complex. They talked for hours, learning each other's minds and hearts. They laughed together and solved problems together, and settled into an easy partnership that felt both brand new and strangely ancient. They reached the town of Opal, Wyoming on a bright afternoon in late summer. It was a small cattle town, all dust and wooden buildings and horses tied to hitching posts. Yates had explained that while his family ranch was in Texas, he wanted to start their own place somewhere new, somewhere that was not weighed down by his complicated history with his father. He had heard that land near Opal was available and affordable, and the territory was growing. They checked into the hotel, taking separate rooms despite the desk clerk's knowing look. Brenna changed out of her travel-dusty clothes and into one of the dresses Yates had bought her in the last town they passed through. It felt strange wearing white woman's clothing again after so many years in buckskin, but she had to admit the blue cotton brought out her eyes. Yates was waiting for her in the hotel lobby, and his reaction when he saw her was everything she could have hoped for. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, and he just stared for a long moment before seeming to collect himself. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you." She smoothed the skirt self-consciously. "It feels odd. I have not worn a dress like this since I was 14. You look right in it, but you also looked right in buckskin. I think you would look right in anything." He offered his arm. "Come on, let me show you around town." They walked the main street of Opal, Yates pointing out the various businesses and introducing her to people they met. Brenna was aware of the curious stares, the way people tried to figure out who she was and where she had come from. But Yates handled it smoothly, introducing her as his intended bride without any hint of shame or discomfort. At the general store, They met a woman named Sarah Davis who ran the place with her husband. Sarah was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and a warm smile. She welcomed Brenna without any of the suspicion Brenna had come to expect from white women. "It is wonderful to meet you," Sarah said, shaking her hand firmly. "We can always use more young families settling in the area. Are you planning to homestead?" "We are looking at land for a ranch," Yates explained. "Something small to start but with room to grow." "Well, you came to the right place. Plenty of good grazing land around here and the territory is relatively peaceful." Sarah leaned in conspiratorially. "Though I should warn you, winters can be brutal. Make sure you stock up on supplies before the first snow." They spent over an hour talking with Sarah and her husband, learning about the area and what they would need to get started. By the time they left, Brenna felt more confident about their prospects. This place seemed welcoming, a good spot to put down roots. That evening, Yates took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant. It was a simple meal, but to Brenna it felt special, romantic. They sat across from each other in the lamplight, talking about their plans and dreams. "I want to see the land tomorrow," Yates said. "There is a parcel about 5 miles outside town that sounds promising. 200 acres with a creek running through it. That sounds perfect." "If it is as good as it sounds, I want to make an offer immediately. Start building as soon as possible." He reached across the table and took her hand. "And I want to marry you as soon as possible, too. This week, if you are willing." Her breath caught. "This week? I know it is fast. But we have been traveling together for weeks now and people are starting to talk. I want to make it official, make it clear that you are my wife and under my protection." He stroked his thumb across her knuckles. "But more than that, I just want to marry you. I do not want to wait any more." The intensity in his voice made her shiver. "All right, this week." His smile was radiant. "Really, really. I do not want to wait any more either." He stood and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. Right there in the middle of the restaurant, in front of everyone, he kissed her. It was their first real kiss, and it was everything she had imagined and more. His lips were warm and firm, his arms strong around her, and the whole world seemed to fall away until there was only this, only them. When they finally broke apart, the other diners were staring. But Yates did not seem to care, and looking at his face, glowing with happiness, Brenna found she did not care either. They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Opal. It was a simple ceremony with Sarah and her husband as witnesses. Brenna wore the blue dress again, and Yates wore his best clothes with his badge pinned to his chest. They spoke their vows in the small church, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When the preacher said Yates could kiss his bride, he did so with a tenderness that brought tears to Brenna's eyes. This was real. She was married. She had a husband and a new name and a future that stretched before her, full of possibility. After the ceremony, Sarah threw them a small reception at her store. Half the town showed up, bringing food and gifts and good wishes. Brenna was overwhelmed by the kindness, by how readily these strangers accepted her into their community. She had expected judgment, suspicion, hostility. Instead, she found welcome. That night, Yates carried her over the threshold of their hotel room. They had taken the biggest room available, with a real bed and a basin for washing and curtains on the window. To Brenna, it felt impossibly luxurious. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," Yates said softly, setting her on her feet. "Mrs. Quinn," she repeated, testing the name. "That is going to take some getting used to. We have the rest of our lives for you to get used to it." He cupped her face in his hands, looking at her with so much love it made her chest ache. "Are you happy?" "I am terrified," she admitted. "But yes, I am happy." "Good, because I am going to spend every day for the rest of our lives making sure you stay that way. He kissed her then, and the kiss deepened, becoming something urgent and needful. They made love that night with the tenderness of new lovers learning each other's bodies, learning what brought pleasure and what brought gasps of delight. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the lamplight, talking and laughing and making plans. "I saw the land today," Yates said, running his fingers through her hair. "It is perfect. Good grass, reliable water, a spot that is ideal for building a house. I made an offer and the owner accepted. As of tomorrow, we own 200 acres. Our land," Brenna murmured. "Our home." "Our new world," he corrected, and she heard the echo of his words from that night in the canyon. "Build a new world with me." And she had. They had. They spent the next several months building their ranch. Yates proved to be skilled with his hands, and Brenna learned quickly. Together they built a small house, just 3 rooms to start, but solid and well-made. They built a barn and corrals. They bought cattle and chickens and 2 good horses. It was hard work, harder than anything Brenna had ever done. But it was also deeply satisfying. Every nail she drove, every fence post she set, every seed she planted was creating something that was theirs. She was building her future with her own hands, and there was power in that. The people of Opal welcomed them fully into the community. Brenna made friends with Sarah and several other women in town. Yates became known as a fair dealer and a hard worker. When winter came, as brutal as Sarah had warned, they weathered it together in their little house, keeping each other warm and entertained through the long, dark months. Spring brought new life. The grass greened, the cattle calved successfully, and Brenna discovered she was pregnant. When she told Yates, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," she confirmed, and the reality of it hit her. She was going to be a mother. She was going to raise a child in this new world she and Yates had built together. Their son was born on a cold November night, with Sarah attending as midwife. The labor was long and difficult, but when Brenna finally held her baby in her arms, every moment of pain was worth it. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and gray eyes like his father. They named him Thomas, after Yates's grandfather. Yates held his son with such tenderness and awe that Brenna fell in love with him all over again. This man, this strong, capable ranger, reduced to tears by the sight of his newborn child. "He is perfect," Yates whispered. "You are perfect. Our family is perfect." And looking at her husband and her son in the firelight of their little house, Brenna had to agree. Her life had not turned out anything like she had expected. She had lost her parents, lived with the Apache, been caught between 2 worlds for so long she thought she would never find her place. But then a Texas Ranger had shot at her in a canyon, and everything had changed. The years that followed were full and rich. They expanded the ranch, buying more land and building a bigger house. Brenna gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter they named Clara and another son they named James. The children grew up strong and healthy, learning to ride and work the ranch alongside their parents. Brenna stayed connected to her Apache family, making the long journey back to the reservation every few years. She brought supplies and money when she could, and she told her children stories about the people who had saved her life when she was young and alone. She wanted them to understand that they came from 2 worlds, and that was something to be proud of, not ashamed of. Yates gave up rangering after Thomas was born, choosing to focus full-time on the ranch and his family. But he remained committed to justice in his own way, serving on the town council and helping to establish fair laws for the growing community. He was respected by everyone who knew him, known as a man of honor and integrity. Their marriage only grew stronger with time. They had their disagreements, of course, their moments of frustration and misunderstanding, But they always came back together, always chose each other. The passion they had felt from the beginning never faded, but it was joined by something deeper. True partnership, abiding friendship, the kind of love that was built day by day through shared work and shared life. One evening, when they had been married for 20 years, Brenna and Yates sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset. Their children were grown or nearly so. Thomas was 20, already talking about starting his own ranch. Clara was 17 and beautiful, with a line of suitors her father scared off with alarming regularity. James was 15, all long limbs and enthusiasm. "Do you remember that night in the canyon?" Yates asked, taking her hand. "When I first saw you." "I remember you shooting at me," Brenna said dryly. He laughed. "That too. But I also remember thinking you were the most extraordinary person I had ever seen, fierce and proud and completely yourself. I fell in love with you in that moment, I think. And I thought you were going to get me killed," she teased. But then she sobered. "I remember being terrified. Of you, of what you represented, of the change you were going to bring to my life. I tried so hard to stay caught between worlds because I thought that was safer. But you showed me something different." "What is that?" "That being caught between worlds was never my destiny. My destiny was to build a new world with you." She squeezed his hand. "You gave me that, Yates. You gave me a home and a family and a life that is completely mine. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," he corrected. He pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Brenna Quinn, today and every day for the rest of my life. I love you too, always." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and purple. Around them, the ranch they had built together stretched out in all directions, a testament to what two people could create when they chose love over fear, when they chose to build something new rather than remain trapped in what had been. The years continued to pass. Thomas married a girl from town and started his own ranch on land adjacent to theirs. Clara married a young lawyer and moved to the territorial capital. James took over the day-to-day running of the home ranch, proving himself to be a capable and innovative rancher. Yates and Brenna grew older together, their hair turning silver, their bodies moving a little slower. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, refined by time and trial into something precious and enduring. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There was food and music and laughter, the house full of the family they had created. Brenna looked around at all these people, all these lives that existed because she and Yates had taken a chance on each other, and her heart was full to bursting. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, she and Yates walked out to their favorite spot on the ranch, a small hill that overlooked the creek. They stood there under the stars, wrapped in each other's arms. "Are you happy?" Yates asked the same question he had asked her on their wedding night so many years ago. "I am more than happy," Brenna said. "I am blessed, I am grateful, I am complete." She looked up at him. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed, a home, a family, myself. You gave me the same." He kissed her forehead. "I love you, Brenna, my brave, beautiful wife, my partner in building new worlds. I love you too, always and forever." They stood there together on their hill, these two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen to build something new rather than remain caught in the old. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the creek sang its endless song below them, they knew with absolute certainty that they had chosen right. Their story was not one of epic battles or grand adventure, though it had held both those things. It was a story of two people caught between worlds who decided to create a third world that was entirely their own. A story of love and courage and the power of choosing partnership over fear. A story of an Apache woman and a Texas Ranger who met in a canyon and built a life that neither of them could have imagined alone. And it was a story that would continue, carried forward by their children and their children's children, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. Because some stories do not end when the people who lived them pass away. Some stories become legend, become inspiration, become proof that even in the hardest times, even when you are caught between impossible choices, there is always another option. You can always choose to build a new world. You just have to find someone brave enough to build it with you. And Brenna and Yates had found that in each other. Years later, when they were both old and gray, sitting on their porch in the twilight of their lives, Brenna would sometimes think back to that girl in the canyon, terrified and caught between worlds. She would think about the Texas Ranger who had seen past her Apache clothing to the person underneath. And she would be grateful, so grateful, for the bullet that had whistled past her ear and started everything, because that bullet had not been the end of her story. It had been the beginning. The beginning of a love that would last a lifetime. The beginning of a family that would grow and flourish. The beginning of a ranch that would become a landmark in the territory. But most importantly, the beginning of Brenna finally finding where she belonged, not in the Apache world, not in the white world, but in a new world built with love and sweat and determination by two people who refused to accept that they had to choose between existing options. They created their own option. They built their own world. And they lived in it happily, surrounded by love and family and the satisfaction of a life well lived. When Yates finally passed away at the age of 84, with Brenna holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed, his last words were, "Thank you for building this world with me." And Brenna, through her tears, replied, "Thank you for asking me to." She lived another 5 years without him, surrounded by the family they had created together, never once regretting the choice she had made that day in the canyon. When her own time came, she went peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her face. They were buried side by side on that hill overlooking the creek, under the stars that had witnessed their love story. And the ranch they built continued to thrive, generation after generation, a testament to what two people could create when they chose love over fear, when they chose to build something new rather than remain trapped in what had been. The inscription on their shared headstone was simple but perfect. Yates and Brenna Quinn, they built a new world together, and indeed they had. A world of love and family and belonging. A world that would endure long after they were gone, carried forward by everyone whose lives they had touched. Their story became legend in Opal, told and retold to new generations. The story of the Apache woman and the Texas Ranger. The story of two people caught between worlds who decided to create their own. The story of a love that was strong enough to overcome any obstacle, brave enough to face any challenge, and true enough to last forever. And in the end, that is what matters. Not where we start, but what we build. Not what worlds we are caught between, but what new worlds we have the courage to create. Brenna and Yates Quinn understood that. They lived it every day of their lives together. And in doing so, they left behind a legacy that would inspire everyone who heard their story to be brave enough to build their own new worlds, to love fully and without reservation, to choose partnership and courage over fear and safety. Because sometimes the best stories are not about people who fit perfectly into the worlds they are given. Sometimes the best stories are about people who build entirely new worlds, worlds shaped by love and determination, and the courage to take a leap into the unknown. And that is exactly what Brenna and Yates did. They took that leap together hand in hand, and they built something beautiful, something that would last forever, a new world. Their world, a world of love.